Yesterday on The Story, we brought you a segment on hate crime that's being investigated in the city of Redmond in Deschutes County. A dead raccoon and a racist note were left on the front door of the mayor's law office there, and the note specifically mentioned Redmond's only black city councilor. Police are still looking for the person responsible. We also brought you testimony from the most recent city council meeting where they discussed the incident publicly for the first time. That included a speech from a 10-year-old named Gavin, who talked about being called the N-word and other horrible names in his 4th grade class. The segment was meant to highlight how racism is, quote, alive and well in parts of Oregon, as one of the city councilors put it in Redmond. Following our story, we got this email from a viewer named Jeff. Thank you for including racism in your coverage of key matters. I'd be interested to see it continually covered. And that prompted us to get in touch with the Oregon Department of Justice for a look at trends involving hate and bias incidents and crimes statewide. We spoke to the Director of Civil Rights and Social Justice with the state DOJ, that's Faye Stetz-Waters. She had all kinds of data from the state's bias hotline that did not paint a pretty picture.
We have about 1,500 reports to the hotline this year already, so we are on schedule to exceed our high of last year of 2,887 reports of hate and bias reported to our hotline. We have communities like the city of Eugene that has a 480% increase in bias reports this year alone. This includes bias and bias experiences in the home. We had 352 reports of bias within the city limits of Eugene already this year, and 381 reports in all of Lane County. So we have a lot of hot spots like that. Things that run the gamut from death threats to bias propaganda flyers being handed out, being received in the mail. We made a lot of progress towards making Oregon a welcome and opening place, and it feels like we've turned back the clock in many areas.
Which is too bad. She told us that in the past month alone, there have been 82 reports to the hotline about race-based hate or bias. There have also been 125 reports based on anti-LGBTQ incidents.
It's no coincidence, I think, that this month is the first month that our anti-LGBTQ bias has surpassed anti-Black bias. In all of the life of our hotline, we've always led with anti-Black bias in this state. It was more violent, there were more numbers, and it was more intense. And this is the first month that anti-LGBTQ threats and violence and bias has led. And I can't help but think it is in response to pride. And this is an attempt to intimidate and silence people. And I'm hoping that people will not cancel their pride, that they will come out in numbers and to celebrate all manner of diversity in our state.
Anti-Semitic incidents have also been on the rise. In fact, last year they reached the highest level in the U.S. since the Anti-Defamation League began tracking the numbers back in 1979. The Pacific Northwest saw 65 incidents last year. That's a 63% increase. We also asked Stetz-Waters about little Gavin and his testimony in Redmond about hate and bias in schools. She told us they've already received 172 reports from schools this year, 63 of which involve serious conduct like online bullying, harassment, and threats. And last year, they got over 400 reports from Oregon schools.
I just think it's disgusting. I think education has really taken a blow. Children learn this behavior. They're learning it from places outside the home, inside the home. So they're learning it on social media. They're learning it in video games. And I think that our teachers are overwhelmed. I can't imagine much learning is happening in the classroom in this type of environment. And there you see the impact of that kind of bigotry in the classroom. It impacts people's learning. In that student, that child feels unwelcome and unsafe, being called all kinds of names. And there are adults that are doing this. And one thing parents can do is to ask their children when they come home from school, were you kind today? Were you kind to your classmates? Were you kind to your teacher today? To get at, because it's come as a surprise to some parents that this is actually going on in the classroom, in the school system.
So what can be done about hate and bias moving forward? Stetz-Waters says when it comes to kids, it can be as simple as enforcing the idea that decency and kindness are always important. And for adults, it comes down to all of us.
I really do think we need to get to bring the spirit of community back. I think COVID took a lot from us, and that bringing back our sense of community when these things happen, so that we know if something like this happens, everybody shows up. We speak out. We speak up and we speak out every time, so that the haters who come to our communities, who drop literature, who deface signs, who vandalize property, who vandalize businesses, know that they won't get away with it.